Live from the Stability and Trim for the Ship's Officers podcast studio, where the vessel's its own best instrument of stability and trim. Welcome. This is William George. Hello. This is William George again. Today we're going to talk about sudden capsize syndrome, a practical exercise and review. And this is part 2 of our free surface discussions. And it's podcast 14 of chapter 8 of Stability and Trim for the Ship's Officer. So today we're on page 177 of the 4th edition of Stability and Trim for the Ship's Officer. Okay, so this whole point is to understand free surface effect better, and we're going to introduce the concept of harmonic or hydrostatic balancing, sluicing, or gravitation between cross-connected wing tanks. So in case 1, let's assume you have a vessel with a displacement of 500 long tons and a beam of 30 feet. Calculate the free surface effect of a tank that is built on the center line, whose dimensions are 10 feet deep, 10 feet wide, and 10 feet in length. And this is shown on figure 8-7. And that would be on page 178. And so we want to calculate the loss of this initial free surface due to the free surface effects. And we're going to use the free surface formula GG prime equals RLB cubed divided by 12 and also divided by the displaced volume. And to get the displaced volume in long tons and cubic feet, we're going to take 35 times the displacement in long tons. And as I noted before, if you see 420, that is merely the 12 times 35. So that's how it's shown in the book. Okay, so if we do the calculation, the GGO, assuming there's just water in the tank and the vessel's floating in the same density water, so the R factor is 1, will be 0.048 feet. Simple enough. Now, case 2, divide the tank as shown in figure 8-7 with a centerline bulkhead. And that's shown on the same page here that I'm on now, figure 8-8. Now there's 2 tanks, each with a width of 5 feet. The free surface of this new condition will be as follows. And as we already said before, if you put a centerline division in a rectangular tank, and it's a hard division where there's no flow through it, so slosh bulkheads don't count, it'll be 1/4 of the original value. And that's what we're showing on the page 179 using the same formula, where we calculate the value for one tank and multiply it by 2. And instead of 0.048 for the tank without the centerline division, now we get 0.012 for both tanks. So it's 1/4 of the free surface. Now we want to compare case 1 and case 2 to see the reduction, and like I said, it's 1/4. So case 3, we're going to take these 2 tanks we made, and we're going to separate them port and starboard, so they're wing tanks. So now we have a beam of 30 feet, and the 2 tanks are separated by 20 feet, so each tank is 5 feet wide. And that's shown here on page 179 at figure 8-9. So if we calculate the free surface again, we know it doesn't matter where the tanks are located if they're isolated tanks. So in this case, the free surface loss is the same as in case 2 for slack tanks. It'd be 0.012 foot of rise. Now, that would be case 3, just comparing the 2 from 2 to 3. Now, case 4, the typical wing tanks, as shown in case 3, are fitted with a 3-inch cross-connection piping. This large piping allows for an efficient refueling of the vessel. These cross-connection pipes should also be fitted with valves so the tanks can be isolated. Case 3 above assumes that the valves are closed so that the tanks are indeed isolated. What would be the result of an operator leaving a cross-connection valve open such that the tanks are not isolated and the liquid in one tank can transfer to the other wing tank? This would be by gravity. Some people call it hydrostatic balancing. Other people call it sluicing Anyway, if we do the calculation, I'm showing a different formula now. It's RLB cubed minus the difference distance between the tanks cubed divided by 12 in the displaced volume. So in this case, if we did the math, it would be basically GG sub 0 equals 10 times the difference between 27,000 and 8,000 divided by 420 and 500. And we get 0.095. And if you have a sharp eye about this, we're assuming in this case it's not oil, and we're using a R value of 1, like we did in the previous sections. If it was diesel oil with a specific gravity of 0.085, basically it would be 0.085 times the 0.905, and it would be reduced a little bit, maybe to a little bit less than 0.75. I'm not using a calculator right now. But we're going to assume it's water in the tank, so as it sluices through. When the tanks are cross-connected, the loss of stability due to this free surface sluicing for only one pair of tanks increases 75 times. This loss is caused by turning a valve. It can also be reduced by 75 times by closing the valve. Now, the thing I want to stress is in an engine room, you can't, with pipes that are painted, you can't see the liquid flowing through them. You can't hear the liquid flowing through them. It just happens. And I believe it's a silent killer. And it leads you to mismanaged tanks. Many interviews with commercial fishermen I've made and merchant mariners about cross-connected wing tanks, as described in cases 1 to 4 above, are revealed that most people mistakenly thought that the cross-connecting the tanks by opening the valves would result in loss no greater than the original large tank in case 1. This could be a fatal misunderstanding. In actuality, the loss of initial stability GM due to the virtual rise in G would be 0.905 foot for one pair of tanks. This is, now remember, for the case 1, the first case of a tank 10 feet wide, 10 feet deep, and 10 feet long was 0.05. So we're jumping from 0.05 to 0.905, a tremendous increase. Take the preceding facts and try to imagine how a large factory trawler could have severe stability problems on a relatively calm day at sea. Now, a large factory trawler or an offshore supply vessel, it could be the same thing. Basically, commercial fishermen, as a rule, do not attempt at hazardous deck operations that would jeopardize the vessel. They depend on the vessel for their livelihood as well as their lives. Factory trawlers and other vessels that started out as oil industry vessels can have 4 to 8 pairs of these wing tanks. Fuel management and fuel transfer operations at sea are routine. Most factory trawlers use their fuel as movable weights to control list. The fuel will always gravitate to the low side if the cross-connection valves are left open. Once the oil moves to the low side, the list will develop and it will not return on its own accord. Oil industry conversions and original designs, as a rule, are done by competent shipyards and supervised by naval architects. This being the case, the weakest link in the chain of safe operations is the vessel's officers, both deck and engine. When cross-connection valves are left open, the oil will move silently from one tank to another. The vessels without tank monitoring systems cannot detect the movement of oil. Small lists that initially result are usually contributed to operations on deck, wind heel motions, or ice. Generally, it's assumed that leaving a cross-connection valve open will have no effect. And that's a mistake. A condition where pairs of wing tanks would mistakenly cross-connected at sea can be catastrophic. So now let's see how a sudden capsize syndrome can occur in a relatively calm seas. Assume that the fuel oil tanks are mistakenly cross-connected and a small list develops to the port due to fishing gear or stowed on deck. The oil in the mismanaged fuel tanks will run through the cross-connected oil line to the port side. On deck, the list is noticed, however, it's caused mistakenly assumed by due to the fish and the gear on deck, no free surface effect below. To correct the list, the fisherman on deck department moves the fish or gear to the starboard side of the vessel. And they see figure 8.12. This action by the deck department returns the vessel to the upright condition. At this point, the list appears to be solved because the vessel is responding to the shift of weight. The deck department has no need to communicate with the engine room. However, the level oil in the port tank now is higher than in the starboard tank, and as a simple principle of physics or the hydrodynamic balancing, sluicing, or gravitation, whatever you want to call it, the oil starts to seek its own level, and the oil transfer is not detected in the engine room, but is steady. Soon a list develops to starboard, and the oil continues to run from the port side to the starboard side. A while later, after the gear has been used to remove the small list to port, the vessel starts to have an unnoticeable list to starboard and keeps increasing due to the oil in the port side running to the starboard side. At this point, an off the center line fish or gear stowed on deck plus mismanaged tanks can cause a large list. It could also start down flooding at this point. All the while, the vessel has continued fishing operations. Most likely, the factory trawler has another 50-ton cod end that's being hauled aboard, and as the final stage of the sudden capsize syndrome develops. Aboard the vessel, efforts to understand what is happening to the vessel is unclear. And I describe this as if you had a block of ice in a plastic trash bag and you held it in your hands, you could feel how stable that block of ice is. But if you let the ice melt and turn it into water, to hold it in a plastic trash bag, it's not the same feeling. It's a bad deal. Additional free surface from the water in the processing deck can also help degrade the vessel stability as well as reduce down flooding angles due to watertight doors being left open, unsecured on a relatively calm day at sea. Fishing all the while continues. The 50-ton of catch are now hauled up on deck. There's a vertical shift in the center of gravity. The initial stability of the GM, as well as the righting arm of the GZ and the large angles of heel decreases. The vessel still lists increasingly greater and most possibly down flooding and commences. As a result, the sudden loss of the vessel is in relatively calm seas. So in this case, if we run a numerical example in case of 1 to 4 above and 8 pairs of wing tanks, if the vessel had a 7-foot initial stability for its GM, what would be the stability corrected for the loss of the free surface? And if we do the solution, we would have 8 pairs of this, and so if we calculated one pair would be 0.905 feet, and all the tanks are cross-connected in common, that would be a total of 7.24 feet of loss of GM, and you only started with 7 feet of GM to begin with. This alone, with the added 50 tons of fish and gear on deck and open watertight doors, could contribute to the loss of the vessel. And that's part 2 for today. Maybe I'll revisit this the next one, maybe not. So anyway, it's been good visiting with you again, and I'll post this, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you. And maybe learn from it, because this is a dangerous thing, mismanaged tanks. I've asked quite a few crab fishermen up in Alaska about the wing tanks on their boats. What do you do with these? And the common answer I got was, it's no problem because we don't use them anymore. That's enough said. Thank you and bye.